Hello, I'm Elder Cannon from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I'm here to introduce to you this wonderful building, the Pioneer Courthouse. This 151-year-old building has served multiple purposes over its lifetime. Everything from a courthouse, to the place of the Chamber of Commerce, to even a historic site. We're open Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from 11 to 2. Come down, bring your family, and we'll tell you all about this wonderful place. Hello, this is the education room that's sponsored by the Daughters of Utah Pioneers. This room we talk about how they process cotton, the whole process with it, from the seeds to the plants to the sewing to the looming. We also talk about this thing called the Deseret alphabet, which was used in the early days of the church when there were so many languages that didn't know how to speak English that they wanted something to read and something to understand each other. So this 38-character alphabet was thought of by Brigham Young. Unfortunately, during the latter days of Brigham Young's life, this alphabet was kind of dying because of its cost. And when President Young finally passed away, the alphabet died as well. They taught a basic level of things in this schoolroom, such as reading and writing, and of course how to farm, preserve, and sew. They had a few schools around here. Each ward actually had their own little school, but before that they actually only had tents and wagons as a way of a schoolhouse, as a meeting place. So this is the Washington County Settlements Room. They had a total of 51 settlements, and out of the 51, only 25 survived. So as you see on this map, you see many of purple and red places. Each red place is a historic monument or a historic settlement. And for each star you see on their name, there might be a little plaque that kind of talks about its history. As you can see in Washington County, you have many places to visit and see and learn something new about the old pioneer heritage that is in this whole area. These are all the current settlements that exist in the state, and you can still find some historic remains, or not even historic remains, but just museums and various things that kind of teach you about its upbringing and why it succeeded.
Oh yeah, no.
In here we talk about water, and as you know in southern Utah, water is very crucial to us, and it's our very way of life. So what we have done is we have created several reservoirs like Sand Hollow, or even a little of Gunlock, to be able to store and preserve water that melts off of the Pine Valley Mountain as snow. And we use this water for various things like drinking, and also we use it as irrigation. Irrigation is actually a whole story in and of itself. Before St. George even came to be, Native Americans actually drew a whole line in the sand to grow crops, because they didn't know how to irrigate, and they just hoped and prayed that it would rain in order to grow their crops. But when the pioneers first came into this area, they taught the Native Americans how to farm and how to irrigate effectively with dams and of course rivers. And from then we were able to raise crops, and they actually found out that Indians were actually very good with water and farming. And from there it kind of just grew. We had several dams, and unfortunately we've had several floods in this area because of those dams and because of the massive rains we get every once in a while when they do come by. But fortunately we rebuild. Welcome to the courtroom. As you can see, this magnificent masterpiece of a room was of course built in the 1870s. They used this courtroom for many things. They used it as a schoolhouse, they used it to dispute water, and of course they used it as a courthouse. The reason it had so many purposes was because there were so few buildings back in the day that had this much room besides the tabernacle, so that of course they used this room. We have many things to cover. The first thing I'll point to is the murals on the back wall. Those were actually painted during World War I, during the Great Depression, to kind of raise the morale of the people down here. The left is, I believe, Zion's, and the right is, of course, Bryce Canyon. And the next thing we have to cover is this wonderful quilt over here. This quilt was actually made during 2008. It was made by the victims of both sides of the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and it was a way of kind of remembrance and reconciliation. So they came together and forgave each other for their ancestors' trespasses. This is what was known as the judge's chambers. So here we'd have our judge and of course the attorney and the defendant, and of course they would talk out what was going to happen and of course why they were here today. The first judge we actually had was a judge by the name of Judge McFarland, or John Menzies McFarland. He's also the same McFarland who wrote Far, Far Away in Judea's Plains, that famous Christmas hymn.
Okay.
This is one of the cells they actually had in the St. George Pioneer Courthouse. They did have a window, but it unfortunately was blocked in due to a recent renovation of the exterior. But otherwise, this building, or this cell, kind of stayed the same. You can see the walls, how they had alkalization as they faded away slowly over time. But it was plastered, and fun fact, the prison mates actually didn't stay in here forever. During the day, they would be led out toward the sheriff's house to get a bath and some food, but afterwards they were thrown right back in. All right, this goes into a story from Silver Reef. It was actually known as the first town to find silver and sandstone, and we call this story The Murder of Carbris and Forrest. To start us off, we have Michael Carbris, who was actually the shift boss at the Silver Reef mine. During a season, the executives of the mine noticed that they weren't getting as much silver as they normally do, and they figured that the mines were slowly drying up. So they went to Michael Carbris and told him that the wages of the workers and himself would be lowered for the kind of prosperity of the mine in the long run. So Michael, doing his job, went to the workers of the mine and told them that their wages were going to be cut. Most of the people and most of the workers were actually okay with it, except for one by the name of Thomas Forrest. Thomas Forrest was already known as a troublemaker in the mine, and when he heard that the wages were going to be cut, he took a turn for the worse. He actually started to go on strike and started to rally the workers to go on strike as well to get their wages back. Unfortunately, this didn't turn out in Thomas Forrest's favor. The executive of the mines, getting irritated at Thomas Forrest's behavior, told Michael Carbris to get Thomas Forrest out of that mine. Michael, again doing his job, told Thomas Forrest to leave and never come back, which didn't sit well with Thomas Forrest. And over dwelling for a few days, there's actually reports of him talking about how he's going to kill Michael Carbris in some bars he was in. Eventually, after 3 days, he jumped out of a bush, stabbed Michael across the guts, and then ran away into the wild. Constable Josiah Hogue finally came to the scene and found Michael Carbris' dead body, and decided to start gathering a posse of around 100 people to try to find Thomas Forrest in the hot desert caves of Silver Reef. After a few days, thankfully, they found him hiding in a cave and then drug him back and threw him in the Silver Reef jail. And most people thought that was it, but some, Michael Carbris Jr., didn't think that was enough for Thomas Forrest, and they plotted to hang him. And they actually tried to break into their own jail to break him out to hang him, which of course didn't sit well with Sheriff Augustus Hardy. The sheriff was actually from St. George, so when he heard of the things happening in Silver Reef, he marched up to Silver Reef, took Thomas Forrest, and actually took him to his jail down in St. George for Thomas Forrest's safety. Unfortunately, the people of Silver Reef didn't very well appreciate the fact that Thomas Forrest was moved down to St. George. So they marched down to St. George and asked the sheriff for the keys to the jail so that they can deal with Thomas Forrest in their own manner. Sheriff Hardy, of course, stood his ground and said, no, you're not getting the keys. So later that night, they actually broke into his house, took the keys of the jail anyway, went to the jail, broke Thomas Forrest out of the jail, drug him to a lamppost to actually hang him and do the deed, but the lamppost actually breaks to Thomas Forrest's weight. So then they drag him to an old cottonwood tree, which is located near Iceberg, hang them there, and all run back to Silver Reef. The next morning, the people of St. George didn't really appreciate the body in the tree, but there was one man by the name of Cottam, I believe, said, I've seen that tree for 25 years. This is the first time I've seen it bear fruit. This is the family room, or right now we're trying to focus on the Carter family. The Carter family was one of the first families down in St. George. And we'll start off with William Carter. William Carter came from England. He actually worked as a blacksmith until he got converted to the church. He left Bristol, England, and then arrived in Nauvoo, Illinois, where he married his first wife, Ellen Benbow Carter. While he was in Nauvoo, he actually grew very fond of plowing. So then when the persecutions came and everyone was called to move to Salt Lake, he and his family packed up and moved to Salt Lake, in which he started plowing again. While he was there, he met his two other wives, Harriet and Sophronia. And then, of course, they were called down to the St. George Mission, or the Cotton Mission, as it was known at the time. So when they moved down there, he, of course, was plowing and doing stuff like that until 1888, when he was actually arrested by federal marshals for practicing polygamy. But fun fact, while he was arrested and he was in jail, he was actually given a gold medal for being the first man to break ground in the Salt Lake Valley. His wives, of course, were very strong as well. Ellen Benbow Carter actually managed the home and farm, and since she was the family doctor, she was good at setting bones. Harriet Utley Carter, unfortunately having a sad past of losing most of her family to measles and chloria before arriving in Salt Lake. She then married William and then had 8 kids with him. She also taught the women down here how to card, spin, and weave the cotton of which they raised. And Sophronia, also coming from Alabama, much like her best friend, wife, Harriet, she managed her own silkworm business and served as a community nurse and was the first woman to start road work down in St. George, which actually has a pretty funny story that goes along with that. While Sophronia was tilling up the garden and getting it ready for the spring, her husband William came out and asked her what she was doing. She said, I'm getting the garden ready. What are you doing? And he's like, well, I came out to tell you that you're 20 yards past the property line. So that's what started the first road work down in St. George. This is the St. George Quarry Pathway. This pathway consisted of 24 Eagle Scout projects, but before the Eagle Scouts came to be, this was used to get the sandstone for the temple, the tabernacle, the courthouse, the Woodward School, and many homes in this area. If you want to check it out, it's just located at 7th West, in which it's just a little bit of a walk where you can see the history of how they mined it. Fun fact, they didn't actually use dynamite to mine this. They used what was known as a pen and feather method, meaning they would drive a little pin into the sandstone slowly, one by one, until the sandstone broke apart. The old Washington County Courthouse sign. This is what was on the front of the building until Washington and St. George traded properties, so it went from the Washington County Courthouse to the St. George Historic Pioneer Courthouse.